The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So welcome to the webinar. We are going to start the webinar here in about 30 seconds or so, just to allow any last minute attendees to join us. So we will begin here shortly.
Nice to see some familiar names showing up here. We know from experience there's probably 3 people right now that are frantically installing Zoom or the update or to go to webinar or whatever we're using. So everyone, maybe another.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a few more coming in.
And again, to those who just joined, we're just giving people a few more seconds because again, we're using GoToWebinar and usually there's an update and we don't want people to join late. This will be about a 15-minute webinar, and we're actually going to do some live demonstrations during it. So stay tuned and we'll get started very soon. So Amy, it looks like it's stabilized. Maybe we should get started.
All right, sounds good. Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar on single sign-on integrations for web to print, which is actually part of the PageDNA information series. I'm your host. My name is Amy Lighthizer. I actually recently joined PageDNA as a customer success manager, and I have a lot of experience in the printing software industry. Many of you may have worked with me already, so welcome. I'm also joined today by Steve Enstad, our CEO, and David Dom, our head of education and training. And David is also our SSO integration specialist. Today's webinar is actually part of a regular series highlighting key capabilities of the PageDNA platform. And really our goal is to go beyond just the features in order to make sure that you understand the business benefits of those features that are available to you. Now, to keep up to date on future webinars, you can simply send an email to info@pagedna.com and we'll make sure to get you set up. Now, before we get started, we also wanted to make sure that you're aware that our website has a features and benefits section that will help you learn more about the functionality and the benefits of that functionality. A website address is found on this page, as you'll see, along with a QR code that you can scan to access that page more quickly. Now, this presentation, as Steve mentioned, will be about 15 minutes or so, maybe longer, but this session is being recorded and we will provide you a recording of that later on. We do encourage you to please ask questions either throughout the webinar or we can wait till the end for our Q&A section. You are all muted during this webinar, so you can either type your questions into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu bar, or you can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon and we will unmute you during that Q&A section. That part of the webinar is not going to be recorded, so we please do ask that you don't be shy. So now I'm going to pass the baton over to Steve to talk about the goals of today's presentation. Steve?
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Nice to see some familiar names in the webinar today and some new friends as well. Goals for today are to understand the business value, not just the what it is, but why it matters behind single sign-on. We want to get into that business benefit view, not only for the print shops, but also for the corporate security teams and other stakeholders, including your customers. Then we're going to talk about how we support those integrations. And then if you'd like to engage with us on one of these, we'll show you how to do that as well. So as many of you probably are aware, single sign-on is a commonly called SSO. We may call it SSO today. It's a login method that lets people log in one time and then access multiple applications without having to sign in again, hence single sign-on. The way it works, you're about to see, but users first sign on to a corporate identity management platform. This is the official login system for the corporation, and there's many of them. They then would, in the case of PageDNA, click on a link to PageDNA and be automatically logged in a way that is not requiring them to type in a password, that is secure, and that can't be bookmarked and allow them to spoof it later. And then they're logged in. They don't have to type in a password, and they can continue using other applications, usually for a whole day without having to log in again. So we're going to jump over now and show this to you live. Today I'm going to demonstrate single sign-on from Okta. Okta is one of the leaders in identity management. They're one of many companies with whom we integrate. And today we're going to simulate that I work inside of a corporate environment and I'm logging in at the beginning of the day. So here we go. I'm beginning of my day. I'm logging in. Now in the real world, we'd have many applications. Today we're just going to show PageDNA. So I'm logged in now and I can go and click on my PageDNA ordering system. And as you're going to see here, I'm logged in automatically. Now I was in the middle of an ordering session right before this order, so that was a little goofy. Let's do it one more time. When the user clicks to log in, they're brought immediately into the PageDNA storefront. And so as you saw, they didn't have to type in another username or password. They're just brought in and we know who they are. This would be my username. And I'm on my way. So obviously it's a pretty easy to use system for the customers and has a lot of benefits. Let me jump back into the view mode here. So you just saw the convenience for the users, right? They log in once and then their password is taken care of. It is our most popular integration by far. And at any time, David here has several of these going. Recently, he had, I believe, about a half dozen or more of these going at a moment. But we do these a lot. And about now 10% of PageDNA storefronts have single sign-on enabled. So we think it's a really important integration today and will continue to be an increasingly important integration as we move forward. So as you just saw, the benefits to the requesters are pretty easy to understand. Who likes typing in passwords all day and remembering, oh, upper, lower case and all that? And of course, sharing passwords between multiple systems is a major no-no, and a lot of people do that. I don't want to get on my soapbox too tall here, but if you're sharing passwords between services, please do yourself a favor and go and change those passwords immediately. But back to single sign-on. Nobody likes typing in passwords all day, so for those people, the users, it streamlines the login process and reduces the number of passwords they need to type in or manage, which is great for them. But there's also a benefit to a different team that's a bigger advantage, really. The corporate security teams that are involved in maintaining access and preventing access to applications are increasingly, I mean, they're already there, but increasingly really conscious of security. And so what single sign-on does for them is it ties PageDNA into a single login system, and it gives the ability for those organizations to disable an employee's access, not to one application, but to all applications in a single fell swoop. So in that scenario, if somebody left that organization and IT disables their access into this single login system, their identity management platform, they're instantly disabled from everything else. So imagine how many different applications a Fortune 500 company is managing, and if an employee leaves their organization, how do they prove that that employee no longer has access to the system? SOC 2 and other certifications in our industries require proof of what happens when employees onboard and offboard. So this is not only helping them really maintain security, but also compliance with various security and certification programs. In short, we make the system more secure. Now, we have two types of customers for PageDNA, and I want to talk about them each separately. For those of you who are in the print for pay world or commercial print, your large and even medium-sized customers are increasingly going to have SSO as a requirement. And so if you don't have the ability to support single sign-on and talk the talk, you may be allowed from working with that account. So it's really important that you know about this and have the ability to talk about it, or those customers, as we said here, may take their business elsewhere. Another benefit to single sign-on is that we see that the customers of PageDNA in print for pay who create a single sign-on integration generally have a longer-term relationship with that organization. They are no longer one of many vendors. They have been officially knighted, like the Knights of the Round Table, as the official vendor by IT. And so that adds credibility, and it also shows how you're more than just print. You're actually helping them with their other issues, security and compliance. The more you can decommoditize your relationship in the world of commercial print and not be seen just as a price, the higher margins you'll be able to command. In the longer term, you'll be able to keep your customers. So it's really important. Now, for those of our customers who work inside a corporation, say a college as a print shop, if your organization has a centralized identity login system, it may be up to you to let that IT team know about this capability so that we can bring your PageDNA store up to this level of compliance and ease of use. So if you're using PageDNA today and you've got a login system where you or your customers are typing in emails and passwords, we'd love to have a discussion with you and help you bring this integration into the awareness of those folks in IT. We're going to get into a little bit of the technical areas now. There are standards in this world of single sign-on, and the primary dominant standard is called SAML 2.0. SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language, and we're on version 2.0 of that. And this is by far the most common mode for integration. We see this on 99% of our single sign-on integrations. Now, occasionally we run into firms that don't have SAML or are building a custom application that otherwise doesn't have SAML. And for that, we have another integration mode called MD5 hash. Like SAML, it allows users to click and log in one time in a way that can't be replayed or bookmarked or spoofed. It's a little less secure than SAML 2.0, but it works well. We're using it with Fortune 500 customers. As I mentioned, the details on the differences of this go a little bit beyond the scope of today's meeting, but if you search the PageDNA documentation for SSO, you'll learn more details on here if you want to get into the nuts and bolts. Continuing, we're going to talk about some of the common identity providers that you may be using or interacting with. These are the big names. They're not all of them, but Active Directory, commonly shorthand, it's called AD or ADFS, is Microsoft's previous generation login system. Oracle has a HR platform called PeopleSoft they bought years ago. It's a common one for us to integrate with. Azure has become one of our most popular integrations. We're actually in the Azure App Gallery as a single sign-on partner. And then as I showed you a moment ago, Okta, OAuth, and Shibboleth, these are other companies out there in this space. In addition, as I mentioned, there are other companies or systems that we've integrated with that aren't on this name because they're proprietary or one-offs. And if you don't see your name or the name of your system here, don't worry, because as I mentioned, we meet systems all the time, and if they're SAML compliant, we can handle them. And if they're not, we have this other approach called the MD5 hash. So we have multiple options available. Before the integration happens, before you invest in this purchase of the module for single sign-on, we want to help you out. If you email sales@pagedna.com, myself and our team here will actually get involved, and we're happy to meet with you, corporate security departments. Typically what happens in those meetings is that we show up and everyone's there ready to kind of beat up the vendor, and then they learn about our standards for security, and we talk the talk, and we have information forms you'll learn about in a minute, and that helps everyone feel more comfortable. Typically we book a half-hour meeting, and after about 15 minutes we're done because the IT team has said they know what they're talking about, and that's our goal, to help you look good in front of your IT teams or your customers' IT teams. With that, I want to pass it over to David here, who's going to take some of his 14 years of experience at PageDNA doing these integrations and tell you a little bit about what happens at the point where you're ready to do a single sign-on integration. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Steve. So some of the things that will be needed before the identity system and the PageDNA storefront are configured for single sign-on are: the PageDNA storefront needs to be in place and the ordering process working is needed. The single sign-on configuration and implementation needs to be purchased from PageDNA. If the PageDNA storefront will use a custom URL or domain name, it needs to be configured before we begin the SSO configuration process. And you will need to have a technical contact who is proficient at configuring the originating identity system. The single sign-on integration requires technical information and technical experience to configure both the identity system and a PageDNA storefront. We have a form that will need to be completed by the technical contact for the identity system. The information collected in the form is designed to simplify the process of doing the initial configuration of a PageDNA storefront. This form will be provided to you at the beginning of the integration process. The SSO integrations typically take between 1 and 2 weeks. 1 day is the very fastest we have ever done. Configuring the integration can take longer depending upon the technical experience and availability of the person or team configuring the identity system. The PageDNA profile feature is required for single sign-on because each user must have a user account or profile on the PageDNA storefront. At a minimum, the system required profile fields must be passed from the identity system. These fields are first name, last name, and email address. We can also accommodate a user ID when the user ID is not an email address. If this is the case, both the user ID and email address must be passed because email is a required field on our end. Additional information can be passed from the identity system to be stored in a user's profile. This is not done very often because the information passed from an identity system needs to be such that it can be mapped and stored in a storefront's profile system. Some examples of the types of information that are passed and stored are a user's title, a manager or approver's email address, a user's phone number, what we call a billing code, which can be something like a PO number or GL code, and what we call the division, which can be a user group in the identity system or their business unit. The finishing touches for an SSO integration take place during the testing process to ensure that users can log in and that a profile is created for new users on the PageDNA storefront. Testing must be done using the customer's identity system. PageDNA does not usually have access to this system for security reasons, so testing requires someone log in from the identity system to the PageDNA storefront. Sometimes it is more efficient if we meet with the identity systems technical team so we can both make any needed adjustments to ensure users seamlessly access your PageDNA storefront and can begin ordering immediately after entering the storefront. And now back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. Now, as an administrator of PageDNA, once single sign-on is turned on, there's a different process for your end users. You just saw it a moment ago. But for you, you will continue to log in through the hub or through the menu or dashboard link on your storefront using your PageDNA user ID. So things will continue to be the same for you as an admin. Now, once these are set up by David and our team, it's a relatively low-touch setup. There are two exceptions. If you or your customer decide to change the custom URL from whatever it is .com to something new, it requires a new configuration. Also, changing identity providers is an even bigger change. If somebody's moving from Active Directory to Azure or to Okta, it requires our team to actually do a new integration from scratch. Unfortunately, there's no savings involved in switching to another identity provider. So we like to be upfront about that so you're aware, and that's why David mentioned earlier, you need to get your domain name set up before we start the integration, because that domain name is an integral part of the configuration. Now, we're definitely not going to get into the deep end of the pool here today in terms of the screenshot you see right now, but this is the single sign-on plugin that we enable to let you manage your storefronts and single sign-on settings if you do wish to change things. For example, you can change the mappings if you do want a title to come in from that outside system, or there's other settings in here. As I said, and I was about to get into it, but there's a lot of capabilities in this tool that are outside of today's meeting, but that's why we have our technical documentation available to you right now to search. I want to mention another subtlety here. In most cases, profiles or users are created just in time. Literally, when a user who's never been on PageDNA clicks on the link, our system creates a profile and they sign in. Well, that's usually the case. You don't want to have to go in there, and there's another benefit to you as a print shop and a manager of these systems. Namely, you don't have to go manage every single user's profile. It just happens. And if they're no longer in the organization, they're gone. However, some companies don't want to or can't allow every employee that has access to the identity system to automatically get access to PageDNA. And so in that case, we have a capability we can enable where, if you tell us ahead of time, this is your requirement, we set it up so that profiles need to be existent inside of PageDNA for a person to successfully log in. So you might create a list of 200, let's say, employees from the curated list of all the employees, load their profiles into PageDNA, and then when those folks punch in, they're allowed in. The people who are coming in that don't already have a profile in that scenario are blocked. So it takes away some of the advantages, but allows you to handle that corner case where only some people can get in. So it's an important one. To summarize, single sign-on is a pretty simple concept on the surface. It lets the customers have a more convenient workflow, allows them to get in and out of what they're doing, not only in PageDNA, but in multiple other applications quickly. But the real benefits are to the corporate IT security teams who allow this to ensure compliance with various certifications they have and ensure that security is kept as an employee comes or goes from their organization. We hope that this has raised your confidence about our capabilities in single sign-on. And what we're going to do next is end the recording, which I will do right now.